Alright, this is part 2 of the lecture for chapter 9. Picking up where we left off, this is Understanding the Laws of Nature, Physics. Numerous studies conducted by the developmental psychologists Spelke and colleagues have indicated that infants even have a primitive understanding of some of the basic laws of physics. Humans are born with the ability to perceive movement. A newborn will follow a moving stimulus with his or her eyes and head, and a newborn will also prefer to look at a moving stimulus than look at a stationary one. Infants appear to use movement to infer that objects moving together are continuous, whereas for infants, two stationary objects may or may not be continuous. Piaget concluded that children understand quantity, the concepts more than and less than, in terms of length. He felt that children do not understand quantity in terms of number. Research by Mailer and Bever indicated that when children are properly motivated, they understand and can demonstrate their knowledge of more than or less than. This test led Piaget to conclude that very young children do not understand quantity in terms of number, and that they understand it in terms of length. A 4-year-old is shown 2 rows of marbles. Each row has the same number of marbles, but one row is spread out. For example, it is longer than the other row. When asked which row has more marbles, the 4-year-old will say the longer row. Piaget took this as evidence to conclude that they understand quantity by length. However, this test that Mailer and Bever used show that very young children can in fact understand quantity in terms of number. A 3-year-old is shown 2 rows of M&M candies. One row has more candies but is condensed. When asked which row she wants to eat, the 3-year-old picks the row with more candies even though it is shorter. So when chocolate is used as the incentive, they can too understand quantity in terms of number. There just needs to be enough of an incentive, and chocolate is that incentive. It would work for me too. Alright, children learn from interacting with others. Early social interactions between infant and caregiver are essential for understanding other people and communicating with them through language. To interact with other people successfully, we need to be aware of others' intentions, behave in ways that generally conform to others' expectations, and develop moral codes that guide our actions, and so on. Theory of mind. This is the ability to understand that other people have mental states that influence their behavior. The recognition that actions can be intentional reflects a capacity for theory of mind, and it allows people to understand, predict, and attempt to influence others' behavior. Even though preschool-age children tend to behave in egocentric ways and view the world through their own perspectives, mounting evidence suggests that they have the cognitive abilities to understand others' perspectives. This reminds me of a story from kindergarten. It was time to clean up all the toys that we had all been playing with, and I had been playing with blocks. And I am a person that looks for efficiency in all things. And I'm across the room, and I got tired of carrying the blocks over to the bin that held the blocks, and I thought, well, wouldn't it just be really smart to throw the blocks over to the bin? Well, I've never been too terribly athletically inclined, and maybe when I throw things, they don't really go where I intend, and I threw a block right into a kid's head. This caused a scene. He dropped crying and the whole thing, and I just couldn't understand at first because I just thought it was so efficient to throw the block into the bin. But I do remember understanding that I hurt the other kid and that I knew I did. So I think that would be a good example of this theory of mind. The same age group too. Children's development of theory of mind appears to coincide with the maturation of the brain's frontal lobes. Here's an example of theory of mind. When a child acquires theory of mind, she is able to understand that different individuals have both different perspectives and knowledge based on their individual experiences. Here's the 2 children, and there's a basket and a box. Sally puts a marble in the basket, and then Sally goes away. The other child moves the marble over to the box. When Sally comes back, if she hasn't acquired theory of mind, she's only going to look in the basket. She cannot perceive that the other actor in the room would have moved it. After theory of mind, they would understand to look in multiple places and that somebody had moved the marble. Understanding social emotions. Research on children's social emotions is focused largely on empathy and sympathy. Empathy arises from understanding others' emotional states and feelings, what the other person is feeling or would be expected to feel in the given situation. Sympathy arises from feelings of concern, pity, or sorrow for another person. Recent research has shown that parents' behaviors influence their children's level of both moral emotions and prosocial behavior. Moral development begins in childhood. Moral development is the way people learn to decide between behaviors with competing social outcomes. Theorists typically divide morality into moral reasoning, which depends on cognitive processes, and moral emotions, which are linked to societal interests as a whole. Research has shown that if people lack adequate cognitive abilities, their moral emotions may not translate into moral behaviors. Kohlberg, a psychologist, devised a theory of moral judgment that involved three main levels of moral reasoning. These would be the pre-conventional level, the earliest level of moral development, and at this point, self-interest and event outcomes determine what is moral. Conventional level. This is the middle stage of moral development, and at this level, strict adherence to societal rules and the approval of others determines what is moral. The post-conventional level is the highest stage of moral development, and at this level, decisions about morality depend on abstract principles and the value of all life. Kohlberg considered advanced moral reasoning to include a consideration of the greater good for all people, with less thought given to personal wishes or fear of punishment. Moral reasoning theories, such as Kohlberg's, have been faulted for emphasizing only the cognitive aspects of morality. To determine the emotional issues that influence moral judgments, such as shame, pride, or embarrassment. Moral actions, such as helping others in need, may be influenced more by emotions than by cognitive processes. Emotions is the basis of morality. The social intuitionist model is the idea that moral judgments reflect people's initial and automatic emotional responses. Emotions such as disgust may not produce moral responses as much as an increase in those responses. In this image, a person makes the same facial gestures, wrinkling the nose and raising the upper lip, when A, disgusted by receiving an unfair treatment, and B, by tasting something unpleasant such as a bitter taste. The biological basis of morality. Research using brain imaging has identified a number of brain regions involved in moral reasoning and during the experience of moral emotions. People with damage to the prefrontal cortex fail to become emotionally involved in decision making, cause narcissistic and psychopathic symptoms. Research by Damasio shows that the frontal lobes appear to support the capacity for morality. In addition to the prefrontal cortex, brain regions associated with emotional responses, including the insula and amygdala, are active during moral judgments and while experiencing moral emotions. People considering moral violations that elicit disgust show insula activity, whereas moral violations that cause injury produce amygdala activity. Puberty causes physical changes. Biologically, adolescence begins with the onset of sexual maturity and thus the ability to reproduce. During puberty, hormone levels increase throughout the body. Adolescent growth spurt. This is a rapid and hormonally driven increase in height and weight. Primary sex characteristics. This is the maturation of the male and female sex organs. And secondary sexual characteristics is the development of pubic hair, body hair, muscle mass increases for boys, and fat deposits in the hips and breasts for females. Biology and the environment. Puberty is affected by a complex and dynamic interaction between biological systems and environmental experiences. The body responds to cues of threat in the form of stress or family changes. Evolutionarily speaking, these threat cues increase a female's need to reproduce sooner or to increase her chances of continuing her gene pool. Thus, hormonal changes are triggered by environmental forces, which allow the girl to enter puberty. The adolescent brain undergoes a phase of reorganization, with synaptic connections being refined and gray matter increasing. If you'll remember, gray matter is for processing. It's one of the two types of matter found in the brain. The other is white matter, which are the lines of communication in the brain. The frontal cortex of the brain is not fully myelinated until the mid-20s, so adolescents have a difficult time thinking critically about the consequences of their actions or planning for eventualities. This might explain some of the really terrible decisions that some of your friends may have made that you have witnessed. Because the limbic system tends to mature more quickly than the frontal cortex, teenagers are likely to act on their impulses. A sense of identity forms. As a child develops and learns more about the world, he or she begins creating a sense of identity. A psychologist named Erikson proposed a theory of human development that emphasized age-related, cultural-neutral, psychosocial challenges and their effects on social functioning across the lifespan. The challenge at each stage provides skills and attitudes that the individual will need in order to face the next challenge successfully. Here is a picture from the book that lays out all the stages that Erikson came up with. This chapter doesn't cover them as in-depth as Piaget, but this one's a little bit more usable. The stages consist of infancy, toddler, preschool, childhood, adolescent, young adulthood, middle adulthood, and old age. You can see in the right of the image it shows the age range for these, the major psychosocial crisis associated with this stage, and the successful resolution of this crisis. This would be a handy tool for studying these stages. Three major changes generally cause adolescents to question who they are. Their physical appearance transforms, leading to shifts in self-image. Their cognitive abilities grow more sophisticated, increasing the tendency for introspection. They receive heightened societal pressure to prepare for the future, prompting exploration of real and hypothetical boundaries. Development of gender identity. Gender identity is one's sense of being male or female, and gender roles are behavior that is typically associated with being male or female. The biological aspects of gender come from many sources, the most important of which is brain chemistry. Gender identity begins very early in prenatal development, resulting from a complex cascade of hormones, changes in brain structure and function, and intrauterine environmental forces. Many of the differences between males and females have as much to do with socialization as they do with biology. Most boys and girls strive to fulfill the gender roles expected of them by their cultures. A transgendered person was born as one biological sex but feels that his or her true gender identity is that of the other sex. Whether you think of yourself as female or male is your gender identity. Some people have biological traits of both sexes, and therefore it might be appropriate to view sex as a continuum of being more or less physically female or male. Males have biological traits that are consistently male, and females have biological traits that are consistently female. but people who experience intersexuality have aspects of biological sex that are both male and female. Peers and parents help to shape the adolescent self. The impact of parents versus peers on young people have become a controversial topic in developmental psychology. Children and adolescents compare their strengths and weaknesses with those of their peers and use peer groups to help them feel a sense of belonging and acceptance. Members of cliques are thought to exhibit the same personality traits and be interested in the same activities. Individuals are seen as virtually interchangeable. Teenagers may not see themselves as part of a homogeneous group of peers and instead may see themselves as completely unique and individual. Adolescent identity development is shaped by the perceptions of adults, the influences of peers, and the teen's own active exploration of the world. Bullying. Bullying is a complex behavior with many contributing factors. Experts tend to agree that bullies might not strongly feel the moral emotions of guilt and shame. Whether in person or via the web, being bullied can have devastating effects. Being bullied during childhood is associated with psychological disorders such as anxiety and depression. The importance of parents. Neither the peer group nor the family can be assigned the primary role in a child's social development. Across cultures, parents have incredible influence over the development of their child's values and sense of autonomy. The best style of parenting is dynamic and flexible, and it takes into account the parents' personalities, the child's temperament, and the particular situation. Research has shown that parents have multiple influences on their children's attitudes, values, and religious beliefs. Conflict between parent and child helps adolescents develop important skills. Note that this conflict is not extreme conflict. This is more like, can you stay out late? And then your parents won't let you, and then you're incredibly mad at them. So nothing too serious here on that one. So this helps them, the important skills that it helps them develop are negotiation, critical thinking, communication, and the development of empathy. What brings meaning to adulthood? In recent decades, researchers working in a wide range of fields have demonstrated that important changes occur physiologically, cognitively, and socio-emotionally throughout adulthood and into old age. Although aging is associated with cognitive and physical decline, it is an important part of life and can be very meaningful. Physical changes from early to middle adulthood. Evolutionarily speaking, a 40-year-old is quite old. At the beginning of the 20th century, the average life expectancy in the United States was 47 years old. That would mean I only have about 2 more years to live if I was existing at that time period. So I guess I count myself lucky. Between the ages of 20 and 40, we experience a steady decline in muscle mass, bone density, eyesight, and hearing. Only for some reason I've only lost my eyesight. The better cognitive, physical, and psychological shape we are in during early adulthood, the fewer significant declines we will see as we age. Brain functioning and body health are a use it or lose it phenomenon. Oxygen and blood are needed to be kept flowing by caring for those systems during adequate sleep, proper diet, cognitive stimulation, and at least moderate daily exercise. Marriage. The vast majority of people around the world marry at some point in their lives or form some type of permanent bond with a relationship partner, though these might be temporary. People tend to marry later in life, and the percentage who marry is declining slowly in most industrialized countries. Married people typically experience greater happiness and joy and are at less risk for mental illnesses such as depression when compared with unmarried people. Unhappily married people are at a greater risk for poor health and even death. Conflicts within marriage are associated with poor immune functioning. The good news is that according to national surveys, at any given time, the vast majority of married people report satisfaction with their marriages. Those reporting the most satisfaction tend to have sufficient economic resources, share decision-making, and together hold the view that marriage should be a lifelong commitment. You can see how if you don't agree on those things, it probably won't last. Will parenthood make you happy? Well, that is a tricky question. Responding to an infant's cries and trying to help figure out why the child is distressed can cause anxiety and frustration for first-time parents. I experienced this. I was way too young when I had my child. I didn't know what I was dealing with, and on top of that, she was colicky. And that means that she would cry a whole lot and not sleep through the night. So for the first 2 years, I didn't experience sleep. This caused a lot of conflict between my wife and I and may have ultimately been the key factor in our divorce. Aside from that, parents also experience great joys, which in the long run, of course I've experienced. I love my child and she's become a really awesome person, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. Any and all misery or anything related to that early part of her life, I just don't even think about anymore. It just doesn't exist. Also, parents within wealthy nations are more likely to be married, richer, better educated, more religious, and healthier. The transition to old age can be satisfying. I'll be the judge of that. In Western societies, people are living much longer, and the number of people over the age 85 is growing dramatically. The elderly contribute much to modern society. 40% of U.S. federal judges are over 65, and they handle about 20% of the caseload, although this might frustrate younger people. Many older adults work productively well past their 70s, as you might have somebody in your life doing exactly that. Deterioration. The body and mind start deteriorating slowly at about age 50. Trivial physical changes include the graying and whitening of hair and the wrinkling of skin. Some of the most serious changes affect the brain, where frontal lobes shrink proportionally more than other brain regions. Other adults who experience a dramatic loss in mental ability often suffer from dementia. Dementia is a brain condition that causes thinking, memory, and behavior to deteriorate progressively. Alzheimer's disease includes profound memory deficits and personality changes. Except for dementia, older adults have fewer mental health problems, including depression, than younger adults. All right, this is an image that shows the damage from Alzheimer's disease. The brain on the bottom shows the ravages of Alzheimer's disease in comparison to the normal brain on top. The holes, also known as ventricles, in the middle of the brain are extremely large, and every section of gray and white matter has lost density. The enlarged ventricles is the biggest feature. Meaning. Socio-emotional selectivity theory. As people grow older, they view time as limited and therefore shift their focus to meaningful events, experiences, and goals. This was devised by a psychologist named Laura Carstensen. Cognition changes with age. Cognitive abilities eventually decline with age, but it is difficult to pinpoint exactly what causes the decline. The frontal lobes, which play an important role in working memory and many other cognitive skills, typically shrinks as people get older. One of the most consistent and identifiable cognitive changes is a slowing of mental processing speed. Sensory perceptual changes occur with age and may account for some of the observed decline. Sensitivity to sound also decreases with age, especially the ability to tune out background noise. Aging also affects memory and intelligence. Memory. Generally speaking, long-term memory is less affected by aging than is working memory. Older people often need more time to learn new information, but once they learn it, they use it as efficiently as younger people. They are also better at recognition than at retrieval tasks. Consistent with this socio-emotional selection theory is the finding that older people show better memory for positive than for negative information. Another reason for declines in working memory is age-related reductions in dopamine activity in the frontal lobes. Intelligence. Research has indicated consistently that intelligence, as measured on standard psychometric tests, declines with advanced age. Fluid intelligence tends to peak in early adulthood and decline steadily as we age. Crystallized intelligence usually increases throughout life and breaks down only when declines in other cognitive abilities prevent new information from being processed. If you'll remember, fluid intelligence is the type of intelligence that allows us to successfully deal with new things. Crystallized intelligence is what happens after we learn how to do that thing. It becomes crystallized. Although memory and the speed of processing may decline, the continued ability to learn new information may mitigate those losses in terms of daily functioning. Contemporary work suggests that there may be gender differences in both genetic susceptibility to the negative effects of aging and the level of severity of cognitive impairments later in life. And that concludes this week's lecture on Chapter 9, Developmental Psychology.